Family annihilator Franz Michael Schwab held the paper's fascination for the usual few weeks. Thursday, February 20, 1896, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Murderer Schwab's victims. The baby died last night, but the father may recover. Franz Michael Schwab, who shot and killed his wife in her son's saloon on Throop Avenue on Tuesday night, is now a double murderer. When he shot his wife, she had Bernard Schwab's 2-month-old baby in her arms. He apparently did not mean to kill the child, but a stray shot struck the little fellow in the side. He was taken to St. Catherine's Hospital and appeared to be on the way to recovery till last night, when hemorrhage set in, and the baby died shortly after 8 o'clock. The mother was notified, and she went to the hospital this morning and had the little body removed to the house on Throop Avenue. Then she went upstairs to the ward where her husband lay with his eye shot out and his cheekbone shattered. She was advised not to tell him of the death of his child, but when the unfortunate woman had put her arms around his bandaged head, she could not keep the story of their tragedy. She burst into tears and whispered brokenly in his ear that their little boy was dead. Bernard Schwab is seriously hurt, but when an Eagle reporter called at the hospital today, he was told that the remaining living victim of the shooting was much better than he was yesterday, and that unless some unforeseen complications set in, he would recover. The funeral of the murdered woman will take place on Saturday, and the baby will probably be buried at the same time. Tuesday, February 25, 1896, the Standard Union. Schwab's eye removed. A shot from his father's pistol caused the operation. Bernard Schwab, who was shot in his face by his father, Franz Michael Schwab, the murderer, a week ago today, had his right eye removed at St. Catherine's Hospital. The pistol ball, which broke his jawbone, also destroyed his eyesight, and it became necessary to remove one eye. He is still in bed at the hospital and has somewhat recovered from the operation. Friday, February 28, 1896, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Arraignments and pleas. Franz Schwab charged again with murder. In the county court this morning, Franz Michael Schwab, the old man who shot and killed his wife Catherine and inflicted a wound on his infant grandchild from which it died, was arraigned, charged with the murder of the grandchild. He was arraigned last week, charged with the murder of his wife. Today he pleaded not guilty and was remanded for trial. Monday, April 13th, the Standard Union. For his life. Franz Michael Schwab on trial in the county court, charged with 2 murders, the killing of his wife, the act for which he must now answer, insanity alleged by the defense. Pleaded guilty in the police court, but compelled to change that plea after indictment by law, his defense conducted by ex-clerk B.J. York, whose first case in the court it will be. Some features of the tragedy. Franz Michael Schwab, an under-aimed little German with melancholy faded eyes, a partially bald head, and a drooping straw-colored mustache, was placed on trial for his life this morning before Judge Hurd in the county court. There are 2 indictments against him, each based on charges of murder, the crime laid at his door being the alleged killing of his wife Catherine and his grandson Christian, a babe. The tragedy which cost these 2 persons their lives and a son, Bernard, the loss of his sight in one eye, was preceded by a long series of family disagreements which culminated in the departure of Mrs. Schwab from the home of her husband something over a year ago. The woman took up her residence with Bernard at 201 Throop Avenue, and Schwab at the time, it is said, threatened that he would kill her inside of a year. The shooting occurred on the night of February 1st last. Schwab, who is 56 years of age, was employed in the molding mill owned by Louis Rossert at Union and Johnson Avenues, and on the afternoon of the day in question left his work to loiter in the neighborhood of his son's saloon. At the time, a jolly party was seated around a table, entirely unconscious of the tragedy about to be enacted. They comprised Bernard, his wife, and his brother Louis, besides Christian Fick and his wife, and Mary and Louisa Hurt. While they were drinking and laughing, Schwab gained entrance to the apartments upstairs, and the party was startled by the report of a pistol shot, followed by shrieks and screams. All present rushed upstairs and were met by an awful sight. Lying on the floor in a pool of blood was Mrs. Schwab, clasping her grandchild Christian in her arms. Standing over her was Schwab, with a large revolver in his hand. Bernard rushed to his mother's side and grasped his child. Then another shot rang out, and a bullet struck the babe in the left breast and penetrated his lungs. Bernard turned, and a third report occurred, and he fell reeling to the floor with a bullet in his eye. Louis then rushed to the front, and the revolver was discharged at him, but the bullet failed to explode, and Schwab rushed into a room and locked the door. A policeman was sent for, but before his arrival, it was learned that Schwab had escaped from a window. He was apprehended later, however. He was cool and collected, and expressed no regrets for his act. The next morning, he was arraigned in the Lee Avenue Police Court, pleaded guilty, and was held for the grand jury. Later he was indicted, and his plea under the law had to be changed. His counsel are now seeking to prove that the deed was committed while he was insane. Schwab, while in the pen of the Lee Avenue Police Court, after being held on his plea of guilty, is alleged to have given out the following: "I've killed my wife, and I'm glad the job is done. All this wouldn't have happened if my wife hadn't had me unjustly arrested on May 26 last and arraigned before Justice Lamlayer, who put me under bonds to pay her $4 a week. I could only pay the money for 2 weeks. Then all my trouble made me crazy, and I became careless in my work to such an extent that I lost my job in Bossert's molding mill. Then I became a bum and a beggar, which I have been for 10 months. Nobody knows but myself what I suffered. Often I went to the district attorney's office and tried to have them proceed against my wife for perjury, because she swore falsely at my trial. They wouldn't do anything, however, and the fact that I was suffering innocently preyed more and more on my mind. Why, for 3 weeks when we lived together, she feigned being sick, yet at the same time, when I returned home from a hard day's work, I would find the empty beer bottle on a table. Once I pay $17 for doctor's bills. I never said anything, though. But when she left me, as she did, and then proceeded against me, it was more than I could stand. I went to her house last night for the purpose of shooting her and also my son. I am satisfied my son was in the conspiracy with my wife. Just as God was crucified and suffered innocently, just so did I suffer. The electric chair has no terror for me, for no man could have suffered worse than I did. I am not afraid to die now. My work is done, and that ends it. At first it was my intention to kill myself, and so end all my troubles. But then the thought occurred to me that if I did that, the story of my misery and suffering would never be known, for my family would have me buried in a pauper's grave, and that would be the end of it. No, I made up my mind to avoid this. I was determined that the world should know how I have suffered. When I went to my wife's house to become reconciled to her, I was reviled and assaulted and driven out like a dog. Could any man who has been good to his family stand that? I couldn't, and I'm glad the job is done." Schwab, when brought into court this morning, appeared oblivious to his surroundings, and seemed to take but little interest in what was going on. He was represented by Bernard J. York, for so many years clerk to the Court of Sessions, and whose first case in court it will be. Mr. York was assisted by lawyer Kohler. It was stated that the defense would rest entirely on the allegation of the prisoner's insanity, and many prominent physicians will be examined as experts. The entire morning session was taken up in an effort to secure a jury. Wednesday, April 15, 1896, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Schwab's sons on the stand, trying to prove that their father was insane. The defense of Franz Michael Schwab, on trial before Judge Hurd in the county court, charged with the murder of his wife and infant grandchild, that was begun yesterday, was continued this morning by the calling of Agnes Braun to the witness stand by Bernard J. York of counsel for the prisoner. Miss Braun lives at 26 Messerole Street, where the Schwab family formerly lived. She testified that she had noticed that Schwab had sometimes acted in a peculiar manner. Charles Schwab, the son of the prisoner, was the next witness. He admitted that in many respects a statement that had been obtained from him by Officer Charles Richter, formerly of the 13th Precinct, was not true. He said he did not know that Richter was an officer at the time the statement was made. He had not told the truth, he said, because he did not trust Richter. The statement related to the insanity of his father. It was not put into evidence. On cross-examination, the witness declared that he had believed for a long time that his father was insane and believed his father insane now. The prisoner had been moody at all hours of the day and night and would stand gazing vacantly at the floor for long periods of time. After the prisoner had been arrested for failing to support his wife, he was so changed that he would rarely speak to his sons. Max Schwab, another son of the prisoner, testified that since his father's arrest for non-support, he had been suspicious, and he had accused his sons of conspiring with their mother against him. He would write for hours alone in the garret, and would walk up and down the floor mumbling to himself. Witnesses believed his father is insane. He had quarreled constantly with his wife, and in his frenzy had struck her. Cross-examined by Mr. Backus, the witness said he had told the police that he had not observed any indications of insanity in his father, but he knew his statement was not true. He had made the statement because he had been told that the police captain must have a statement, and if he did not give one to the captain, he would have to go to the station. Witness did not want to lose half a day's work, and thought he could save himself from loss by making the statement he made. Friday, April 17, 1896, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Schwab escapes the chair, found guilty of murder in the second degree. Franz Michael Schwab, who has been on trial before Judge Hurd and a jury in the county court for 3 days on 2 indictments charging him with murder in the first degree for killing his wife and infant grandson, will not die in the electric chair. The trial ended yesterday, shortly after 6 o'clock, and the jury returned to the courtroom at 12:20 o'clock with a verdict of murder in the second degree. This means for Schwab imprisonment for life. It had been confidently expected by his counsel, Bernard J. York and A. J. Kohler, that Schwab would attain acquittal on the ground of insanity. This would have meant imprisonment in the Mattawan State Criminal Insane Asylum, with a chance of his ultimate release. The jury returned to the courtroom at 9 o'clock last evening and asked Judge Hurd for the testimony of Bernard Schwab, one of the prisoner's sons, who had specified several occasions when his father acted in a manner that led the son to suspect that his father was insane. The session yesterday was taken up mainly in the examination of alienists. Dr. Gray, for the People, testified that Schwab, in his opinion, was not suffering from paranoia, but committed the crime either through anger or jealousy. He would not admit that hereditary taint of insanity existed in Schwab's case. He did not believe so much in hereditary insanity as some other alienists. Tuesday, April 21, 1896, the Buffalo News begged mercy. Scene in court caused by a murderer of his wife and grandchild. Life sentence given him. The man had committed a double murder and destroyed his son's eye. During his trial, he asked to be taken away and executed. Judge Hurd, sitting in the county court today, sentenced Franz Michael Schwab, the Williamsburg murderer who on February 18 killed his wife and grandchild and shot his son Bernard's eye out, to life imprisonment at Sing Sing. The shooting, with which he had been charged, was the culmination of a series of quarrels which Schwab had had with his wife respecting her conduct. He insisted that Bernard was not his son and that his wife was consorting with Adam Schaeffler. He was convicted on last Thursday. During his trial, twice Schwab lost control of himself, burst out crying, and jumping up begged to be excused from the ordeal of a trial and put out of his misery. Once he shouted, "Take me away! Why do you want to try me? I did the crime. Hang me and put me out of my misery." When he was arraigned for sentence this morning, Schwab was in a more nervous condition than he had been before. When he took his stand before Clerk Joseph Winter, he trembled. He gave his age in a broken voice, but when he was asked if his parents were living, he broke down and cried bitterly. His sobs and moans could be heard in the courthouse corridors up the stairs. It took some time to get from him the statistics required by law. This over, Judge Hurd asked, "Have you anything to say why sentence should not be passed?" The interpreter repeated the question. It was the occasion for a fresh outburst on the part of Schwab. His frame tottered, and a court officer brought him a chair. A terrible scene. A long pause, during which Schwab partially recovered himself, ensued. Then his lawyer, Mr. Kohler, said that he had nothing to say. Judge Hurd said, "Schwab, it is only due to the loyalty of your sons and the assiduity of your counsel, Messrs. Clerk and Kohler, that you do not stand here for sentence of death for the brutal and inexcusable murder of your wife and grandchild and the maiming of your son Bernard. The sentence of the court is that you be confined at hard labor in the state prison at Sing Sing for the term of your natural life." Schwab threw up both hands and uttered a series of piercing shrieks that brought crowds running from all directions to the courtroom. He jabbered out in German, "Oh, save me, have mercy, forgive me, put me out of my misery, oh, judge, save me." He kept ejaculating these words till two officers seized him and tried to lead him away. He sank to the floor between them, and they had to drag him to the pen. Before they had disappeared, he ceased screaming and only moaned feebly. He had collapsed. An ambulance was summoned, and the surgeon attended the man in his cell. He was conveyed later to Raymond Street Jail and was taken to Sing Sing this afternoon.